All right, so I'm thrilled to introduce our three panelists and our moderator. So I'm going to give an abbreviated form of their introductions, but you can see their entire bios on our event page if you want to read more about what they're up to. So first is Kelli Clark. She's the Chief Culture Officer at Aon, a multinational professional services firm. She directs the firm's strategies for inclusive people leadership and culture initiatives, colleague engagement, inclusion and diversity, onboarding, and early careers. She also serves as a senior advisory member for the senior advisory board member, for the Center for Ethics, Diversity, and Workplace Culture, that group Sedgwick that we fondly refer to as here at Fox. And she earned a Bachelor's of Science in Communications at Missouri State University and a Master's of International Business from Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, Scotland. All right, after Kelli is Jameel Rush. And he is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He leads DEI initiatives impacting the organization's culture, coverage, and community efforts. He also has over 15 years of global talent management experience and human resources experience. He has a master's degree in organizational leadership and development from St. Joseph's University, and he is a Temple alum with a Bachelor's of Science in Human Resource Management and Management of Information Systems. He's also an adjunct professor at Fox and is on Sedgwick's Alumni Leadership Council. And our final panelist, and I think our first international speaker, so I'm really excited to have him, is Mendes. He's the co-founder of the Future of Work Conference and the event manager for RePeople, the oldest remote work conference in Europe. He's a thought leader and consultant in the areas of digital nomadism, remote work, and sustainability. He has a degree in industrial engineering from the Faculty of Engineering in the University of Porto in Portugal, and also a Master's of Science in Operations and Management Logistics from Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. And finally, our moderator, Eric Brunner, our very own Assistant Vice President of Learning and Development at Temple University's Human Resources Division. He's responsible for the design, delivery, and evaluation of Temple's in-person, virtual, and online professional development and compliance training programs. In addition, he's an adjunct faculty member in the Human Resources Department in the Fox School. He has a Master of Health Science from Lincoln University and a Doctor of Education from Temple University. So thank you very much to our three panelists and moderator for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric.
Welcome, everyone. It's a delight to be here. It's really thrilling for me to get to meet and to chat with our three panelists, Kelli, Jameel, and Jay. Based on our conversation yesterday, I think that you'll really enjoy hearing their thoughts and their responses to the questions that we have to ask them. So I wanted to start with something general for each one of you as panelists. And, you know, this world of work that we are in has completely shifted. It's different, it's changed, everything about it. I'm curious if you could share or talk about from your perspective, like the demands of the workforce, right? And what are employees expecting from their employers that is different from the past based on the changes in the workforce? And yeah, Kelli, why don't we start with you? And
I was just going to say, do you want volunteers?
Yeah, please do, yes.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for organizing this event. It's a really important conversation. I'm really thrilled to be a part of this with this particular panel, because I think you're going to get a variety of perspectives and experiences, and that is ultimately what brings innovative ideas and creativity and entrepreneurship to life. And so thrilled to be here today. What I would say, you know, from the perspective at Aon anyway, we are 50,000 colleagues in 120 countries, so a rather large global organization, is that given the pandemic, given the way that the world has been evolving, we've seen a lot of changes over the past 18 months to 2 years in particular. And I think you're seeing kind of worlds coming together in a way that they didn't ever before. So people are working in their homes. You're seeing the insides of people's homes that you know may never have seen before. You're seeing people needing time to do personal things during what was a traditional work day, and you're seeing people working into the evening because work kind of goes all day long now. And so there are a lot of differences in terms of what we're seeing for needs from colleagues, but there's also a way that we're working differently now. We're connecting in different ways. We need to provide different kinds of benefits. We're talking about the whole person. So we're talking about mental health. We're talking about resiliency. We're talking about digital and technical capability. And we never really talked about those things before. And then underpinning all of that, you've got this leadership and professional development that is also changing. We need to teach leaders how to lead and manage teams in different ways. We need to teach colleagues how to interact and connect in different ways. And so I would say across the board, we're seeing a real change in how we work, how we connect, and how we lead. So maybe 2 cents from my corner of the world.
Great, thank you very much, Kelli. Jameel, a little bit about how this might be affecting you in from your perspective. I might also say before you start talking, Jameel, is that or responding, that questions can come in via chat. So if you have questions or if there's specific comments that are made by our panelists that you'd like to know a little bit more about or clarification on, you can send them to me via chat and I'll be happy to share them with our panelists. Go ahead, Jameel.
Hey, thank you, Eric. And again, thank you all for joining this afternoon and excited to be here. And I think part of my answer will absolutely piggyback off of what Kelli said, in this idea that there's an expectation now that companies deal with the whole person, right? This idea that you come into an employer, do your time, and then leave is no longer the case. And because of that, there's sort of this expectation that we're dealing with a human first way of working. So we've seen that that started to creep up before the pandemic. I would say it sort of got expedited once it hit, of like, oh, we were talking about this idea of the fictional line between work and life anyway, and now it all but dissipated overnight when we were all sent home. From my perspective, also because I put on this hat around DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, the conversation around the pandemic and social unrest resulting from the murder of George Floyd, I think they're intertwined. And it was one of the reasons that that movement was able to get so much traction, because people were home, right? And they were out from doing things. And if you look at the statistics, USA Today actually published an article earlier this year that looked at workplace responses around their expectations on how they deal with it. And something like 2/3 of all employees in the US are expecting their employers to take a stand against racism. More than half of the workforce said that they're willing to quit an employer if they didn't see them actively take a stand. So now I'm not just concerned about how you treat me as a person when I come work here, but I'm concerned about how are you a good corporate citizen as an organization. And that expectation wasn't, it might have been present beforehand. It certainly was not present as strong as it is today. And the willingness for workers to take action, right? Think about the number of walkouts you've seen in the last year, the number of open letters that have been sent to CEOs of organizations, the number of times that there have been public rebukes of leadership within a company from their workforce. That's not going to change. And that's an ever-present way of what we work. So I need you, now employees are expecting you to treat me well because I work here, but you need to represent my values and make sure that you are doing things that further my personal stances as well. And that balance has been unique and new, and at times murky and clunky a bit as we figure out what the right balance looks like.
Great, thank you, Jameel. Jay, from a remote work perspective, what are you seeing that sort of adds on to what Kelli and Jameel have shared?
Yes, thanks, Eric, and thanks. I'm very honored. I didn't know that I was the first foreigner outside to be part of your talk. So that's extra weight on me. So, but anyway, thanks for having me, and really happy to share a bit my perspective around remote work and about the event that I've been organizing. And I think that that I can add also even what Jameel just said, and even Kelli, especially if you have more demands from the side of the employee. Nowadays with remote work, you also have more tools for you to change. So nowadays you know that you can find a job anywhere in the world because you can find a remote job easier. So then you can leave your company easier. That's why now we are talking about the great resignation or it's not only, but also because of remote work possibilities. So a company now needs to be aware that if you don't have flexibility in terms of remote work, you're going to lose talent because your competitor gives that flexibility and then you lose it. So when you are actually in a job interview, it's not a surprise that now you're going to be asking your potential employee, what's your remote work policy? Oh, we don't have it. Okay, then maybe I'll go somewhere else. So that's what you are requiring from your employer nowadays, is that at least to have a policy. I know there's a transitional policy because now we are still under COVID effect, but there's a afterward, right? And there's a lot of companies, even Google and Facebook, are already deciding what's going to happen afterwards before people are like, it's going to be like this. So because in the beginning, even the big tech companies, they wanted to keep the employees in the office. Then they start to realize that that's not going to work after COVID. So what companies need to give is clear message of what's their policy, so that the employees can decide if they want to stay, if they want to join, to get their jobs. And then on a second level, if you already work in a company, what you need as a worker is to see a clear capacity for you to manage teams and yourself in this type of digital world. It's a synchronous relationship. Again, not going just from a normal meeting to a Zoom meeting, but having the tools and the processes to manage your work, not in the same way as before, because they're not watching, not seeing, and but definitely more into results and other tools that allow you to evaluate work being done without being able to see your work. So you need a company to be able to show that it's capable to do that, so that the work environment, the life balance environment, and is achieved by the employee. So it's definitely a challenging time, and remote work just added an extra layer.
Yeah, so just quick points that I'll make is hearing that we're looking at the whole person, Kelli. We're really focusing, we've always called ourselves human, capital or whatever, but now we're really looking at the whole person. Jameel, how you said that it's the whole person includes what we value, what's important to us, what do we stand for, and how do we make with the new kind of portability of work, how do we offer those things to employees to make sure that they know that these opportunities are going to be available to them for them to be able to be employed and work inside of them. I also heard a little teeny bit of that employees are beginning to have big expectations of their employers. But I wanted to go back to another thought, and Jay, you alluded to it a little bit, but each of you. So there are these dynamics. How are they affecting collaboration? How are they affecting how people are interacting with each other? Because now we're collaborating in just the way that we are right now on Zoom. So how is collaboration, the ability to work effectively with each other, being influenced by some of these new dynamics? And we could do this popcorn style, as each one of you has an impulse or to want to say something, you can jump in and I'll make sure I'm sure you'll make sure that you're all included as well.
So if you're going, okay, sorry, if you're going
No,
opposite
please.
order now,
Please.
So I think that in terms of collaboration, again, there's a challenge that needs to be managed, especially from the company side, to give the right tools and guidance for that. But also yourself as a person, it's also an adjustment phase. You just said that we are moving to a more human-centric, right? People say we're going out from the work-centric life and going to a more human-centric life, where we can manage our time in a different way, and we can look at our life and our daily life and decide which hours, what part hours you're going to work. So that requires also a lot of discipline as yourself as an employee, as working for a company. So collaboration, it's moving again from asynchronous to asynchronous, and not everyone is able or knows how to do it or understands how to do it. Like, instead of waiting for the meeting to decide everything, instead of waiting for that, no, you discuss. And I'm having issues, and I've been doing this for years, and I still have issues with companies and projects that I work with. They want to spend a week, or let's meet up next week to decide. And I said, no, let's decide until next week. So maybe we don't even need a meeting next week. There's even many apps and software that I use one called VidLogs, which is like asynchronous video meetings. So you have like a meeting room that doesn't happen until next week, and we send video messages inside that room to keep this, to start to go on the discussion. So I send what I have to say, and then you say, and then you say. Normally, by the time we get to the date, there's no meeting needed. It's already decided. But again, these are tools that are there, but it has to be in terms of management to implement these so people understand. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with the same schedule with kids at home some time of the day, and then you'll be struggling, you'll be very, very upset. So definitely there's a big transition that needs to be done for management side, and also for your own self-adjustment that asynchronous is the way for you to collaborate.
And I think it's interesting, Eric, because you asked two questions in there around working effectively together and then ability to collaborate. And I don't know that they're necessarily correlated, especially depending on who you ask, because there are a lot of people who will tell you they are way more, quote unquote, productive in this home environment than they ever were in the office because they collaborate less in some ways, right? Like there's not a person coming up to my desk or flying by or jumping into my office to start to talk to me so I can dial in and focus. But a lot of the loss, I think, is characterized in opportunity costs of like what is missing from those water cooler conversations or lunchroom, or what's being missed when we're not sitting next to each other. And I say like, hey, Jay, I heard you said you were working on this. This might be another thing. So that's a lot harder to quantify in terms of what's being lost there. But the reality is that the collaboration has become a lot more tactical, and it's a new muscle for organizations, because now I need to teach you when you're onboarding. So me, for example, I onboarded during COVID, so we were all working from home. As I met people, it was sending an email saying, can I schedule a catch-up coffee with you? Can we go do a virtual lunch together? Or I just want to sit on your calendar and I don't have anything to work on. I just kind of want to get some FaceTime. So it's kind of like this awkward dating thing of like, oh, do you want to spend some time with me and talk? Versus before, if I just saw you enough times in the hallway, it was okay to just say hello eventually, and there would be some organic relationship growth from there. So it's a long way of saying I don't know the answer to your question, but I do know that the question around working effectively and working collaboratively are two separate ones. And organizations now need to learn a new muscle, which is teaching people collaboration when an in-person crutch, if you will, isn't there or isn't as present to help people make those connections.
Well, let's table that for just a second, because I think that I thank you for making the distinction about that, Jameel. But let's talk a little bit about effectiveness, Kelli, and then let's look at I'd love to get your thinking around the ability to collaborate. So we'll separate it out, but I think that that's a great distinction. Thank you for making it, Jameel. Go ahead, Kelli.
Yeah, and actually I was going to say that point exactly is in my mind where this idea of innovation comes in, because for the first time, everybody in the organization is trying to solve these things from an equal playing field. So before, you would have had office cultures and leaders who had grown up in an environment and kind of people passing down ways of doing things. And everybody is trying to figure out how this works now. And so it doesn't really matter if you've been working for your particular firm for 10 years, or if you onboarded like Jameel, virtually, and you've been there for a matter of months, because none of us have worked like this before. And so it is for sure requiring new skill building, new ways of thinking about things. And I think we forget how much energy we need to spend on doing that kind of thing and thinking about, does this meeting really need to be 30 minutes with one person, or should it be a series of 5-minute kind of sprints with multiple people? Should I do one-on-ones that are designated with individuals, or should I just open a virtual room and let people pop in as they have questions? And Jay, your comment about the asynchronous and synchronous takes me back to when I was trying to teach my kid how to go to school in the living room while I was working from my office and doing all of these things together. And it brings me back to, you know, our lives are just so much more blended now, where, you know, as you're talking about putting video chat or video messages into a room, I'm thinking, yeah, we do that naturally with our family when we send videos of our kids to the grandparents or whatever we're doing. And so in some ways it was like you kind of had your work self and your home self, and now those selves are becoming, you know, it is your whole person, and you don't really have that separation anymore. And so I think the real effectiveness piece is, how do you still do all of the things that matter to you, back to what Jameel was saying, and get value and find value and make sure that your work is aligned to your personal values, but then you're also working for an organization that values some of those same things for you. And then how do you also kind of do the things in your personal life that bring you fulfillment while you're collaborating with your colleagues across time zones or across projects, or maybe from different parts of your organization. And I don't think any of us have figured it out, but it requires a willingness, a growth mindset almost, to get creative in how we approach things in a way that we've never really done before.
Although Kelly, there are already some companies that have been remote first from the beginning. So those guys are probably the ones that are a little bit of an advantageous position compared with other companies, that because they have done like that. They've been doing like that all the work from day one. So those are potential references. And the conference that I organize, I always bring hybrid teams and teams that are in this transition, or companies that are in this transition, and I bring examples of remote first companies that can share what they've been doing, well, again, from the start. So those are the lucky ones. They're already ready for what's coming.
Oh, Eric,
yeah, thank you.
Because Zoom.
There's a question that came in from a panelist. I'll get to it in just 1 second. But just a quick thought. Are there some? So you mentioned sort of the skill piece, Kelly, and that some places, Jay, might be ahead of others. And I'd like to hear just, are there, if we're going to collaborate, so if we're separating effectiveness or productivity from collaboration, and the playing field has been flattened, really, you know what I mean? It's in 2 dimensions now, you know. What are some of the skills that are going to allow our colleagues in our organizations to collaborate effectively? And then I'm going to give you the question that came in via chat.
Yeah, maybe I'll just pick up where I left off, and then I'll pass it over to Jameel and Jay. But I think one is, you know, that sense that Jay was talking about, that I don't have to be in the room with everybody to kind of know what's going on. So I need to think about how I do check-ins regularly on the things that I'm working on, and not necessarily all of the things that I need to know or maybe want to know, but what are my priorities, and then how am I clear about how that work is moving in the organization and where it's getting done, and how do I set up a regular cadence to get that more open flow of information that would have happened if you would have been sitting across from someone in the office. And so we have used some technological solutions for this. So we created Teams spaces that they function kind of like Slack channels, or you know, group chats where multiple people who are working on the same thing can just comment, and then you go in and get your updates, you know, as you need them. I think the other skill that we're talking to a lot of our colleagues and leaders about is this idea of agility and resiliency. So like, how do you be flexible, and how do you continue to take on board information that you've learned and then iterate as you go, without necessarily having to, as you mentioned, Jay, like have the meeting next week before you make a decision. So how do you make it a more fluid decision-making and interaction process when you're not in person, or, you know, brick and mortar type environment? So I guess a couple of thoughts from my side.
Yeah, let me just quick add, and then for Jameel. So in terms of productivity, and there has been done studies about this, remote work is more efficient, more you are more productive when you're remote. And of course, it's generally a study. Of course, everyone is different, but in general, you are more productive. And one of the reasons is, like Jameel said, you're not distracted, right? You can do your work, focus, and then if you want interaction, you go and get it. So this is statistically proven or scientifically proven in a way, in terms of numbers. Okay, just on others. So Jameel.
And I agree, and we've used some of the asynchronous tools that Jay and Kelli have spoken about. So we use Slack within our organization, and it's a great way for people to just have dialogue. And you know, we're a journalism organization, so people write willingly, so that fits with our culture well. But there are channels that we set up as an organization, so general Slack channels, and there's specialty ones for people who want to talk about things, everything from work and how we build our newsletters to like cooking channels, right? Like those things all exist as a way to plug into the organization. But the other thing that's really important is, you know, the onboarding experience is now even more critical for your new hires. And whereas it could be a little bit decentralized and hope for that specific leader to come up with what they'd be doing for a new employee. That can't be the case, because if you onboard and you don't have a leader who has a really structured plan about who you need to meet and who you need to connect with, and teach you how to figure stuff out within the organization or how to get things done, you have someone who literally might be sitting at their computer by themselves doing nothing with no idea why that's not happening. And that's when you get those 30 days later, that person that just started putting their resignation because they were sitting there for 2 weeks, like, I don't know what I should be doing, and I haven't spoken to my boss in a week, right? Or every 3 days I speak to my boss, which means 2 days in between, I have no idea what's going on. So that experience for your new hires has become so much more critical of teaching leaders and teaching managers how to create an experience where people can get connected through who you're talking to, through those asynchronous tools, the other organization things that might be in place, like employee resource groups. Where are all the ways that you can plug in? Because the stickier we can get you to the org sooner, the more likely you are to become engaged and the more likely you are to stick it out through those things. But if you don't have those connection points that create a level of connection, sorry for the redundant language, to the organization, now it's much easier for you to just kind of filter away. And I never met you in person, so quitting's not that big of a deal because I've never even seen you. So the attachment is low.
Yeah, there's almost like an ability to hide sometimes, you know, in these technological tools. So how do we keep people from doing that, or hiding, if you will? So I just heard a couple of things that I'll highlight, which is, Kelli, you know, that you mentioned agility and comfort with ambiguity, comfort with how things are going to be different from the way that they were before. You know, technologically, it sounds like you and Jay were talking about some of those tools that can be used when people aren't around, when that 24-hour clock is operating. How can people who are on different time zones or whatever, or different time frames, meaning lifetime frames, how can they contribute to that conversation effectively? And then I really heard what you said, Jameel, about the onboarding, a structured onboarding plan. Because I remember, how many of us remember when we started a job someplace and, you know, we got introduced to like 3 or 4 people and it was like, okay, sink or swim kind of thing. But in this particular environment, we if we want people to, our employees, contributors, to connect to us, it means we have to do a lot of thinking about the first day, the first week, the first 2 weeks, the first month, and really give specific planning. So those are some great comments. And you know, the skills are about resiliency, comfort with ambiguity. Those are the things that I heard, because things are really different. Let me share the question that came in via chat, and we'll tie it into what we're talking about. So our colleague asked, how can companies make the playing field more equitable? As in, how do we overcome things like there's a lack of resources or technological skill for new workers? So I think what I'm hearing in the question, and Maya, you can tell me if I got it right, is that if there's a different level of skill or capability technologically, right, how do we balance that so that those individuals can be significant contributors and give them the opportunity? Maya, let me know if I got that right in your question, and then I think I'll present to you, and we'll see if there's any clarification. She said, I got it. Okay, great. So whoever's ready to share.
Yeah, and if I'm understanding the question correctly, and let me know if I'm not, I think what she's referring to is the lack of comfort with technology and how that impacts my ability to plug in and navigate with the organization. And the reality is that those things that we took for granted, right? Like, I might teach you how to do your job, but I'm not going to teach you how to use Outlook, right? Like, or I might teach you how to do your job, but I won't teach you how to do PowerPoint. Like, those things you should know coming in, or there's an assumption that you have that baseline of tech savvy. So if we're talking about putting equity into the process so that those who are less comfortable with technology can still come in and be successful contributors, then that means you need to spend time getting people up to speed on technology, and that needs to be a dedicated part of the onboarding experience of, hey, let's sit down and talk about how you set up your Zoom account. Here are the Teams channels that are here. Let's walk through what that means and what that looks like. I had never used Slack when I joined my organization. So I was like, join a Slack what? And I started signing up for all these channels, and I got all these dings, and I was very confused for a good 2 weeks into the organization. But those experiences now need to be teachable versus figure that out, get close enough and let me know how you navigate it. And the work around equity means that you put aside resources to help those who have been left out of the broader conversation. So how are you putting aside resources to focus on that for specific populations that might be less comfortable with the technology that now is core to how we operate?
Good. And that, to me, that's part of the upskilling plan that might be, and I appreciate the question because, you know, for me, I think it is a D&I issue, if you will, because some people are coming into the organization with more or less comfort with those things, but how do we create the opportunity for them to take initiative themselves? I know what you mean, Jameel. I have more OneDrive folders than I need, you know, because when I started using it, everything was in there. So I could completely relate. But I'd like to hear more from either Kelli or Jay about what your thoughts on that sort of equitability conversation. How do we do that? How does Aon do it? How are you hearing about it in the world of your colleagues in the remote work world, Jay? Either one.
Jay, you look like you're about to jump in, so why don't you go?
No, yeah, I was eager. No, my answer is rather simple. On my side, if you are looking for remote work nowadays, that's a given, right? You have no chance. I think you're talking more about in transition, right? If you're in a company that changes to this kind of environment, then how to make it that everyone or someone that is looking for a job and then it gets there, oh, it will actually work remote. And I think that's what Jameel says. So I think part of the onboarding now needs to be focused on how we communicate and work, regardless of the type of work that we do, right? Onboarding should be, this is what we do, and this is how we work. And that needs to be a big emphasis now for the transition. For the remote work part, again, if you don't know how to use Slack, then you don't go online to find a remote job. That's unless you find a course how to use Slack. Maybe there's some courses will come. Maybe some people are already teaching that, but it's by default. You have been working online. You need to do that. If you look for coaches, there's a lot of coaches now for you to find a remote job or remote work. They're going to teach you that. So that can be a career support for you. And there's a lot out there, and I invite some of them to my conference, like remote work coaches, which are people that actually help you to do the transition. But in terms of corporations, then the focus needs to be on onboarding, on teach them right away all these tools, and the request on interviews if they have those skills or not. That can be decided.
Yeah, I guess we have taken a little bit of maybe a different approach, or maybe kind of tried to bring it up a level at Aon. And so we spent about 2 years ago really looking at what kind of skilling and capability building did our colleagues need really across the full culture spectrum, if you will. And so we were looking at how were we doing in creating an inclusive culture? What kind of diversity was represented in our organization? What kind of onboarding experience led colleagues to get more connected? What kind of career development opportunities were available and who got to go to those experiences. And when we boiled it down, we were able to kind of identify across, I call them pillars, but 3 areas that we felt like all colleagues probably could learn something if they chose. They could choose their own adventure, but we wanted them to have opportunities to develop culturally and to advance our culture. So we created a set of opportunities, developmental opportunities. Some of them were on demand. Some of them you could attend virtually, and some before the pandemic you could attend in person. We also thought that there was a set of things that people probably needed to know to become more technologically upskilled or capable, more confident managing virtually, more confident being part of a team in a virtual environment. So we created a set of offerings around that. And then we said that there was a 3rd area about delivering for our clients. Ultimately, Aon is in the professional services industry, and we work with clients, and that is, you know, our goal is to bring the best of who we are to help our clients make better decisions. And so we developed a set of things that, you know, trainings, offerings, resources that colleagues might need to become more upskilled or to develop in that area. And we put this in the water and said, there are offerings for colleagues, there are offerings for leaders, there are on-demand offerings, there are in-person offerings, but you can kind of choose your own adventure. And what this did, I mean, we were amazed. More than 14,000 colleagues in 9 months took one of the trainings that we offered. More than 45,000 colleagues downloaded our Ally Guide, a tool we created to drive allyship in the organization. And so it was a little bit of a, if you build it, they will come kind of experience for us, because we felt like people just need to continue to grow. None of us have arrived as human beings, and our needs and our developmental needs are different. Some of us are really well versed in what it means to be an inclusive leader, and we just naturally do those things. Other people aren't, and that's okay. Let's help those people who are really great at it bring the others along in cultural work, in technology work, in client service work. And we started using colleagues to teach these courses, and then you kind of started to build this, you know, teach the teacher, and then leaders as teachers kind of approach. And it's really been neat to see what it's done at Aon, because it's not only upskilled people and leveled the playing field, back to Maya's question, but it's created an engaging environment for our colleagues as well. And then they're ultimately working to create the kind of culture that we want at Aon through a consistent and a cohesive approach.
And if you don't mind, I jump in there, because Kelly, that's so important.
Yeah.
That's so important around this upskilling of people, because in this virtual environment, we've actually created spaces where new biases have been birthed, right? You know, before, if it was a virtual interview, it meant that they called you. Now it is, you need to have your screen up. There needs to be a great angle. Hopefully your Wi-Fi is strong enough that it's not stuttering along the way. So we've created an environment where it potentially can increase the marginalization of populations that are less fortunate. So as organizations, we need to make sure that we're not hiring for things that matter very little to the job, or just that are very quickly taught to an individual. So we had a person we were interviewing, and her camera was really weirdly angled, right? And sort of it created some stuttering and Wi-Fi. But when we looked at the role, she was perfect for it and was able to give us great answers. But look, it was a clunky experience through this virtual environment. If we allow that to now become a determining factor in who we look at for roles, we've created another barrier to entry for the workforce. So we have to remove those barriers, because they're artificial and they don't correlate to job performance.
Yeah, no doubt. Sorry. Please.
No, go right ahead, Jay. No.
I was just saying, no doubt. And even the issue of having to work from home, and not everyone has conditions at home to work from, and have families and everything. So it definitely counts. This is definitely a big issue in terms of inequality, access to work. No doubt about it. And not having the technical conditions or the family conditions to work from home. This is a problem. And even the skills, like you said, right? Because this knowledge economy goes very fast. So a lot of people are left behind, even older generations that can make the transition as fast. This is a terrible consequence from this remote work movement and this future of work. That companies need companies and society and needs to society means governments need to help as much as possible to make it a playing field for everyone. But it's not going to be easy. It's especially if you talk about your home and in your conditions. How can you change that? How can you make it like you have like a clear place to work and there's no noise around? It's a big problem.
Yeah, thank you, Jay, and thanks for bringing that up, Jameel, because it's something that I've observed, which is I'm privileged. You know what I mean? When we went fully remote, you know, we had enough machines, we had enough internet speed in our house to be able to navigate school, 2 jobs, 3 people working, but not everybody has that. And then I really appreciate what you said about sort of how do we find out what's related to the work that the person's doing, rather than, because we're looking at each other's offices and homes right now, right? And how do we do that in a way that doesn't influence the ability to make an employment decision? And how do we create the opportunity? I really appreciate what you shared about sort of what Aon's doing. It sounds like, you know, my reading of Aon is that they're kind of an exemplar, like, you know, in this world of thinking, you know, and prepared themselves, even though they didn't know they were preparing themselves for a global pandemic. But, you know, the work that they're doing, you know, is doing that. And Jay, could you talk a little bit, because when people are applying for jobs globally, right, and they're doing it, if what's happening, if English is not their first language, you know what I mean, if that kind of thing, is that factoring into the future of work and how people are interviewing and how they're being considered? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I don't think so. Speaking English or Gobblish or something, it's kind of standard nowadays in terms of companies, and especially because you tend to write more than you speak, so that's an issue. And a lot of companies don't even require to speak on interviews anymore. They ask you online assignments or that kind, especially technology companies, when that's not very required. So that's buyers look more for the technical side. But other than that, I think other issues like being able to work as a team and use the tools are much more important than if your English is correct or not, or depending of course on time of work. If you are a journalist, then that's a bit more important. But if you are not in that field, then I don't see that being an issue. And nowadays, like you said, it's so easy to get work from across the world and both ways. Then English. Language it can be a big barrier.
Yeah, great, thanks. So let's see.
One thing that I'd like to add, just that I've seen a lot of companies move on in terms of the conditions for you to work from home, is that some companies actually offer home offices and home office conditions. So you are hired by the company, then they send you a desk, a table, lighting, or they pay for your internet, they pay from some of your power. So they try to give you the right conditions so that everyone has the right conditions, at least in their place and at home, that they can work. So that's a way for you to try and to make it, again, plain for everyone and fair to everyone. Even the ones that don't work from home, or they prefer to work from a coffee shop or a co-working space, but at least they offer these conditions. And if not materials, at least a stipend for them to use.
That's really fascinating, because it sounds like what I'm hearing you say, Jay, is that if that company or that organization doesn't have to invest in square footage, that they can take the investment. So this for me is kind of thinking forward, right?
Yeah.
If you're, you know, forgive me, I don't want to be in commercial real estate right now, because it sounds like what you're saying is if I don't have to pay that per square foot cost, but I could invest in, internet, a good router, modem router, a laptop, or things that would allow that person to work remotely, that organizations are making that decision. Does that sound accurate?
And they save money. Yeah, and they still save money. Even if they invest in people's homes, they're still going to save money based on the office they're paying this downtown or something. that's a no-brainer.
Is that happening at either Inquirer or Aon? I'm just curious, Kelly.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and just say, I mean, we're certainly looking at this and you know, our strategy, we're calling it a smart working strategy. And I wanted to go back to something Jameel said about just, you know, equitable processes and the way that we are really intentional around bringing talent in. But it's both bringing talent in and enabling colleagues to work in a way that meets them where they are as well. So for some people, they don't want to be at home because the conditions aren't, you know, ideal for them for a variety of reasons. For some people, they prefer to be in a coffee shop because it's inspiring to them and the creativity comes out. For other people, they actually want to be in a quiet room in their house, and that's where they work. And so our strategy is really more around developing a framework for colleagues to choose where they do their best work, where they do their most effective work, and then set up their day or set up their week in a way that brings that out in them. But I think your point, Jameel, on how we bring talent in is super, super important, and how we think about talent. And as Jay has mentioned, you know, global talent now, and trying to understand how you get the best talent from a global pool instead of just, you know, I may be in Philadelphia, and so I'm looking at the pool in Philadelphia. It's a completely different approach right now. But in order to do what we are, you know, and I would say we at Aon are wanting to do in terms of changing the diversity of our teams and building a more inclusive culture, we're looking at everything from how we phrase our job descriptions, how we talk, you know, and ask questions in interviews, what kinds of things actually are the requirements to getting a role that were just sort of standard business as usual before, that nobody ever really asked why we do the things we do or why we're asking these questions in the way we're asking them. And then once we have a, you know, our colleague base, I feel like it is our responsibility then to create a real culture of allyship where across all of our teams, we are signaling to each other that we are safe, that we are creating accessibility, and that we're creating equal opportunities for colleagues. And this requires a very rigorous, back to kind of the whole point where we started, you have to be innovative, you have to be creative, you have to be willing to continually grow and challenge yourself and ask why we do the things that we do, or sense check them along the way in a way that we, you know, you kind of got going before and things sort of were in place, and we're in a world now where, because everything has changed, it's created an opportunity to just reevaluate. Is this the best way to go about this particular exercise? And in some ways that is a little bit of a silver lining if you take the opportunity to do the work and make the changes that are needed.
Yeah. Let me just add, and then maybe kind of shift a little bit here, the perspective, because sometimes I feel when having these discussions that we are talking about something that is bad in general, and it has a lot of impact. When discussing this, there's definitely a transition, but we are possibly talking about something that is overall good for our society in terms of happiness, in terms of people's satisfaction with their lives, because they'll have more time and more flexibility to do their things. Of course, there's loneliness for sure, and that's something, a mental issue that needs to be addressed. But in general, we may be talking about something that's actually good to our society, and this human-centric lifestyle that we are able to have can definitely be a positive thing for us, and people will not want to go back how they were before. So this can definitely be a positive thing, especially if you think, and I have always this argument when having these discussions, like, yeah, but remote work is not for everyone. And that's true. So is real in-person work is not to everyone. a lot of people struggle, and a lot of issues arise from working in person directly with people, right? We talk about harassment, all other things, and you stop having those. So introverts don't want to be surrounded by so many people. So if you look at all of these factors, we may be talking about a very positive shift to our society. There's going to be pains for this transition, for sure, and we are witnessing them, and inequality, for sure. But long term, this is a positive revolution. It's an evolution for our society, and we're going to see happiness levels going higher and not lower as overall. That's my hopefully not biased perspective.
Great point. So thank you very much for sharing those things. We have another question that came from our colleagues. I thought I would. So one of the things, with this kind of the workday that sort of stretches the boundaries of the traditional workday, and while this human-centric process that you mentioned and all of the things that Aon's doing to allow people to kind of make these choices about how they work most productively, what happens during the growing pain period when people get burned out? Like, what's your thinking about how we take care of some of those colleagues who might not have figured out exactly how to set the boundaries up real well to start?
Well, yeah, and I think there's a couple of questions, and I'm sorry if that question was directly for Kelli. I will move aside and
No. It's for the
anyway. I want to hear what you all are doing anyway.
And I think we're seeing what happens when people burn out, right? With this great resignation, like people are quitting and they're just like, I'm done with work altogether. So we're kind of living in that moment where people did as much as they possibly can, and then there was like a wall, and they're like, I'm over this, right? And we're dealing with the consequences of that across a lot of industries, if not most industries, right now for it. So there's a few things that we're starting to put in place, but I think leaders should be thinking about more broadly. One is teaching managers to spot the signs of what are the flags that you start to see in your team members that say like, hey, there's something more going on here than you just being a little bit late on this deadline because you're somber constantly, or like it feels like you're talking a lot negatively about yourself or life, or whatever those things might be that can help managers spot the signs becomes really important. So we did some kind of trauma-informed training earlier this year to help managers understand when how people are experiencing all these things that are going on. The other piece of that is what are the wellness tools that you have in place within your organization. So maybe you already have an EAP and we provide counseling services. So you get free therapy through our employee assistance program. So helping employees understand that that's a resource for them and plugging them in right away to say like, hey, here's somebody you should go and talk to. How do you think about time off as an employer? We do comp days because journalism news cycles can be so extensive. We'll have a journalist who will work 5, 6, 7, 8 days straight because it's election season like it is right now. So at the tail end of that, we say, all right, well, you've earned time off now because you've worked all of this time. So make sure you take this time away from work to refuel and refresh at the same time. But it's a new way of operating as a leader because now you're helping to diagnose not just whether or not someone can perform their job effectively, but you're also helping to diagnose whether or not they're okay. And for many of us, we don't even know how to tell whether or not we are okay ourselves, much less that in other people. So that now, if that's an expectation of what your leaders and your managers have to do, you have to grow that too. And you need to put some energy and resources around teaching managers what that looks like, because at the end of the day, they're at the front lines. And then they also have to model the behavior. We've had a lot of conversation about time off this year. And our time off packages, it's fine. It's middle of the road. But what we realized is people just weren't taking it. And we had that conversation of like, well, why aren't you have all this time stashed away. Why aren't you taking it? And the conversation is always, well, I didn't know it was okay. But why didn't you think it was okay? My boss never takes off, right? So now it's the cascade of I'm looking above me and that person doesn't use it. So that signals to me that's not okay for me to do it. And I'm home anyway. And if I take a vacation, especially this past year, I can't travel. So how dare I think that I could just take time off and not do work? It's so antithetic, like it's so opposite of the way that we're thinking right now. So modeling behavior, teaching sort of trauma-informed and wellness-informed techniques, and then having processes in place to plug people in professionally becomes really helpful in creating wellness within the culture.
Yeah, I heard, and I heard like sort of normalizing work breaks. It was another piece of that I heard, Jameel, like normalizing that it's okay to not answer emails for a period of time, or, you know, turn your phone off, or not look at the laptop. Now, it doesn't mean going rogue, you know what I mean? But it means saying, I'm going, you know, I report to you, so I'm going to take this Friday just to take a walk, or, you know, do things that feel nurturing to me, that allows me to do that. Does that sound accurate, Jameel?
Yeah, and Eric, hopefully before it's too late, because people are good about taking the time once they've broken, right? Like, oh, now I have no choice but to take the time because I am literally falling apart at the seams. But how do you get in front of that before people have reached that burnout, to say, what are you doing to give back to yourself and refuel and refresh consistently, so that you're not at that point where it's an emergency because you've not done it the entire along the way.
Yeah, and I heard that's a leadership skill, a leadership behavior, to be able to observe that, pay attention to it. Go ahead, Kelli, because I think you were going to make some comments related.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of similar, you know, work at Aon. Very practically, we've given colleagues a week's worth of global holidays. So we all take the same day off, and we found, you know, I know in the news world, you can't do that because the news just doesn't stop coming. So I think part of, back to your question on skill building earlier and what organizations can do, I think you have to be realistic about what will work given the industry or the organization that you're in. But what we've done is given people these global holidays, and then have, you know, the organization for the most part shut down. And in areas where colleagues can't for whatever reason, then they get to take an additional day at a time that works for them. But we've done a lot around this whole idea, back to the kind of the whole human, helping normalize this kind of continual reflection on what people need. So is it actually a day off? Because for some people that kind of amps up the anxiety, like I'm at home and I'm not looking at my email and I wonder what's there. And so we've tried to normalize this idea of getting kind of reflective about what you need, and then putting in place the things that you need to do to make whatever you need possible for you. And so we've done similarly, we've talked about PTO and getting people back in the habit of planning for time off, and then setting up people to be their backup. And then for me as a leader, when I'm telling my team that I'm off, I'm actually not over there sending them a bunch of emails and asking to do a bunch of things, but actually leaving them alone and for my own well-being, taking some time off. But this is, again, back to where we sort of started. This is a skill. It's something that we have not figured out. We've become more aware as an organization that we have to talk about this, that we have to normalize being realistic about the fact that we are human beings and not superheroes with superpowers, and that there is a limit to what we can do. This feels like a lifetime ago, but early in the pandemic, when many organizations were laying colleagues off, we actually implemented a pay cut to preserve all colleagues' jobs. Now, as you might imagine, that landed differently throughout the organization. There was a limit on what colleagues, you know, at a certain salary point, the colleagues, anybody below that salary point was exempt. And so it wasn't to take anybody into a place of financial, you know,
Hardship.
Yeah. But it enabled us to save jobs for the organization. Now, what ended up happening was that we kept everybody employed, and as soon as we realized that we were kind of on the other side of where the fear was, and we were out of, we knew where we were going in the pandemic, we reinstated salaries and gave people 20% back. And so it was like a loan with interest, and there were all kinds of dynamics around that. But we've tried to go back to kind of the higher purpose of the organization, that we're in some of these things together, that it is, sometimes it requires all of us giving up a little so that the whole organization can be healthy. Sometimes it requires some of us giving up something for others to get what they need. And if it means I need to work an extra hour so you can take your day off, then when it's my turn, somebody will do that for me. And we're trying to just normalize this idea of being realistic about our own needs, about the organization's needs, and then doing what we need to do to make all of that work. But I mean, it's a lot easier said than done in practice, I would say.
If I can add, and I know that this is, you are doing COVID times, so that limits a lot in terms of traveling, of course. And I'm talking only about mitigation. This doesn't solve all the problems for sure that Jameel and Kelli were talking about, and of course there's other issues. But what about people that are able, because a remote worker is a potential, like we call it today, digital nomad, right? So what about people that instead of working from home, they go, I don't know, to Florida or to Hawaii or something, and they keep working from there? Because I've seen, and I've been to different islands in Europe, but I've met a lot of remote work communities from corporations. And what happened with them is that they're working, but they are in an amazing place. So it kind of, yeah, it's okay, right? I can answer the email and then go for a scene, then I can go back and all this. So will be traveling a solution for some people that to be able to keep working and keep the same productivity and same results, but at least don't feel so burnt out throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I do want to just kind of talk about, like, to come back. So it sounds to me when I'm hearing you talk about like innovation, that some of the innovation that you've been talking about are how each one of you has done some thinking, and whether it's organizationally or whether it's the remote work world or the future of work world, and thinking about how the human condition has changed and how we can accommodate the human condition in order to, to maintain people's ability to do this thing called work, right? And that we have to superimpose on that there are diversity and inclusion initiatives, that we can't forget that's a constant now. Like, one of the things that did happen last spring, at least in the US, when we had the George Floyd murder, is it said, oh, wait a minute, this is something that we can't pick and choose. We have to pay attention to this. And now prospective employees are looking at our organizations and saying, what are your values? Do you value the same thing that I do? And if you do, then I'm going to consider working for you. Mm-hmm. And that all of these things are going to be influencing the ability for people to collaborate, to work effectively together. How did I do in sort of tying some of those things? Because I wanted to connect back to our original thoughts and ideas, which you've done a great job of doing. I do have some more questions from the participants. So I'd like to give you a couple of those that have rolled in. So one person asked about sort of, what are you seeing in terms of the gig economy? So there's a lot written these days about contingent workforce, people not being full-time employees. What are some of the tools the question is, what are some of the tools that are missing that are keeping employers from fully embracing the independent contractor, freelancer kind of dynamic? That's the way that the question was presented. Ibo, let me know if I got your question correct. But I'd be interested, one is that happening in your worlds? Are you seeing it? And are your organizations thinking about what you can do to embrace those individuals from that gig or contractor perspective?
And there are aspects of it that have been consistent in news and media, right? So we've constantly had contributing journalists in our home delivery spaces as well. When in like the classic newspaper piece, there are people who are part-time workers, or even ICs in some cases. And I don't know that I've seen a lot of employers pushing away from like embracing the gig. If anything, I've seen more employers lean into it too heavily, to the detriment of the workforce. And you're seeing some of the legal pushback relating to that across a variety of employers of saying like, yeah, this person's not really an IC. They are a full-time employee. So I would say probably the biggest barrier is that one of the requirements around being an individual contributor is that you don't control my time, right? Like that means that you just tell me what the product is and I choose how I deliver on it for it. So that is an uncomfortable relationship between an organization and an individual. And if that was the predominant relationship in which an organization and an individual work together, that creates constraints itself. So it remains to be seen, and Jay might know this more than I do. It remains to be seen about where the gig economy is going. It will emerge, right? It will continue to grow, but how much that will impact the current workforce remains to be seen. But that relationship, to your earlier point, Eric, that relationship has shifted. And if from a compensation standpoint, I can own my time and where I work and how I work, and I don't have all of the pressures and oversight of being an employee here, but still remain financially whole and stable, then that does become a big push and pull for someone of like, I can just do this and do it on my own time, or I can clock in from 9 to 5 every day and have to worry about childcare and working from home and navigating all of those systems that make it more complex.
Yeah, so I think that I have kind of 2 points here. One that I have from experience, and this is not necessary because of what's going on now, but let's give me an example for American companies that want to hire employees even from Europe. It's not an easy thing to be done. So one of the solutions is to use the contractor model, right? Then you become a contractor, and so, but that's because that's let's say a need in terms of reform from our global hiring systems, and even taxation is an issue of course for this type of lifestyle when you move to different countries, and then which taxation country you belong to. I know that you guys have a very specific and you tax regardless, but not all the countries do that. And then, so for example, if I'm living out of Europe, then I won't be taxed by Portugal, where I'm originally from. So there's a lot of issues, and that has made the contractor and the freelance community to grow. But that's more like an artificial need, because the need for a full employee was there, but it just increased the contractor just to make it easier in terms of bureaucracy. But then, on the side note, the freelancer and the gig economy is growing, especially for younger generation where kids or stability is not as relevant, right? And they can just have 3 or 4 jobs at any moment, or just one because they just want to work some hours, not too many. So that flexibility of having 2 or 3 jobs and reduce, and that you see, I see that a lot, definitely on millennials and younger than that. And that's growing. It just technology just makes life easier to get jobs, and this flexibility of getting an opportunity here and there. I see people that are without a job for a couple of months, and they're like, this is on the last month of savings, and they're not afraid. Like, yeah, sure, I'll probably just get something next week and I'll do it. And then I get like, oh my God, like I'm still from generation, so it's just 1 month savings, so I'm going to survive. Like it's really mind blowing, but it's definitely technology just made it much easier. So I only see it growing with this generation, just keep going.
Yeah.
And the reality is that with 3 or 4 freelancer jobs or projects, or even 2, you can probably make much more money than if you made as an employee. So if you are good at what you do, then it's a no-brainer.
Thanks. Go ahead, Kelli, if there's anything that you have.
I would just say at Aon, I mean, I think the nature of our business is we've always had a variety of roles. I mean, we do have independent contractors as part of our workforce, primarily, you know, FTE base. And I think we'll always have a mix of that. So much of our business is built on like long-term relationship building with clients, and that, you know, doesn't really translate into kind of this more, you know, independent contractor type of model for us. But I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, maybe at some point our core becomes a smaller model. I'm not entirely sure, but for us, we haven't seen much fluctuation at all in terms of the types of roles that we have, just by nature of the work that Aon does.
Another question that came in from one of the participants was about AI, and if it's being utilized in, you know, in ways that for repetitive tasks, you know, or gamification, or, you know, can you speak to if that's being used in your world, or how you've seen it being used in, you know, from your colleagues in the future of work world? Jay, that would be interesting to hear, because, you know, there's been a lot written over the last several years about, you know, how things can be done technologically, you know, with a little bit less. It still needs humans, but a little bit less. So I'm curious to see how that, what your thoughts are, right, on this one.
Yeah, Jameel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, go. Yeah, and there's more to the question, but I'll hear from you first. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, when I read this question, I was thinking also, yeah, a little bit about technology, how to evolve in terms of tools to be used, and I could talk a little bit about virtual reality, but we talk about AI and repetitive tasks. Yeah, so yeah, this is a trend even before, and a lot of jobs that have been so-called admin jobs and virtual assistant kind of jobs, they are slowly and, well, not slowly, quite speeding up, being substituted. By far, there's tools coming every week, and I do like a lot of productivity, something that I will like a lot to invest my time in tools, and you are seeing so many things that a couple of years ago I was hiring a virtual assistant to do some things, and nowadays I just don't need it. I just do it myself with a very short assistance there. In terms of gamification, I haven't seen much in terms of corporation. I've seen in events that I organize, conference and events, and gamification is definitely a big part now of making the things, making you more engaged during the events, so you get a little bonus or something. I see that a lot in the tools, not so much in the work daily. But if we talk about the virtual reality, then I can add also that even last week we did a demo using the Facebook workspace that Mark Zuckerberg just used to present Meta last week. And we simulated to have a meeting where you actually can handshake and you can do things together and go and start to design stuff, or you can share. You can see your reaction, your face reaction, everything, and that adds, in my opinion, and that was not a consensual opinion for sure, that in that presentation, it adds a little bit more of humanity for our 2D meetings. But again, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think we'll continue to see the impacts of automation on repetitive work that doesn't require like really intricate decision making. That those are the jobs that researchers has shown are most prone to automation, and probably one of the biggest factors that will impact the future workforce and the availability of jobs. So that's, you know, that's certainly a mid to long term piece. You know, that from my world, the conversation around AI specifically, as the question alludes to, things like recognition or bonuses or those things, is because I constantly look at things from a DEI lens versus equity and inclusion. What we've seen with AI is that the same biases that are present in individuals are often coded into the artificial intelligence. And there was a hope out there for some time that AI would increase objectivity. But because the way AI works is it looks at past data to make future decisions. And if that past data only represents one walk of life or one group of people, or others aren't very well reflected in it, you see the AI struggle to be truly objective versus just reinforce the biases that were already present beforehand. So I'm less bullish on it today than I was before that research started to emerge. I was like, oh, great, computers can make the decision and they'll be objective. And I'm like, oh, computers are just as bad as us. So that's unfortunate about it. But it does mean that there's going to be some time before those tools can accomplish effectively the things that we want them to, even as we start to dabble into those spaces.
Yeah, that's a great.
Let me just add, sorry, so just me addressing, just Jameel, you're in a specific field, and that could be interesting because I see a lot of tools now for AI writing, content writing. Yeah, I'm sure you think it's probably like a terrible thing, but just wanted to, I've seen them popping up everywhere now.
Yeah, and they'll help you with grammar, but when the first day an AI tool writes an investigative journalism piece, then I'll get worried. For now, I think we're that's Terminator Rise of the Machines time for.
That's an important point though, because tools like that are looking backwards versus forwards, or you know what I mean? They're not thinking in the moment. And a lot of the skills that you were talking about earlier about how do we take what we're given in the moment and make decisions that are going to affect kind of future actions and future processes and ways that we can do things differently. So that particular model may or may not support some of the things that people are thinking of using it for. How about your comments, Kelli? And then I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you that are going to start to wind things down.
Sure. I was just going to say, along that same line, Jameel, we've started to use AI to see if it can help enable the, more organic, like water cooler experiences that you would have had in the office. And so we've tried a couple of things in our Teams chats and things like that to match people up. And the funny thing is, it can't, well, depending upon how you look at it, you keep running into the same people that you would, if you were on the same floor at the same time, maybe it is a reflection of reality. But so far, it does a good job. It helps to create some, kind of fun cultural connections that maybe people wouldn't have otherwise had virtually. But I would agree with you. We're only at Aon just kind of dabbling in it from a culture perspective. And I think that there is some things that it can certainly help with, and we'll continue to explore all of that. But for right now, it's proving that, unfortunately, automation and computers won't come and save the day like maybe we once thought that they would.
Makes great fodder for science fiction movies,
Yeah.
I was right with you, Kelli, of like, oh, that's unfortunate.
Darn.
So I have a couple of kind of two questions that I'd like you to share some information about. So like, one is give you an opportunity to talk about what's on the horizon. Like what are you thinking about that's next for you in thinking about your organization or in the world in which you work that you're thinking about going forward? What is that horizon piece? And then the second question that I wanted to ask is I'm always interested to hear, like, who are you reading or what are you listening to? Like, who are the people that are reading or providing you with, thinking that's helping you move forward or giving you ideas of what to do next? So there's two separate questions, like sort of what's on the horizon for you, in your organizations, and then who are you reading, who are you listening to that you're finding of value?
I can go first. So in the terms of horizon for what I've been exploring and it's on my way, is that this transition to online events, if you talk about events and all the potential that is done, if you talk about trade shows, job shows, or conferences or summits or what we're doing here, the big challenge afterwards is because the world is going to be hybrid. So we're going to have remote and in-person events and at the same time. The challenge is to make it efficient in terms of networking, in terms of B2B connections, right? Because I think socially and we still want to have in-person meetups, and that's where the value is, or we touch each other. But when we talk about business opportunities and business connections, that's going to continue a lot in the digital realm, right? We're still going to have trade shows, maybe smaller, maybe less trade shows, maybe instead of doing 10 trips a year for trade shows, maybe up to 3 or 4, and then the rest you can do it online. So how to make it in a way that works well online for this kind of networking and even if it's just a community of professionals, and you make it for making the typical speed network and all of these tools to help you to achieve that. So for me, that's the big challenge to break up, is to bring this networking plus capability when you are actually in online event like we are here today. So how will you be able to meet with the audience and network with them and all that kind of stuff? There's a lot of tools out there, but none that really break this in a way that it's super efficient and productive, because we talk about business, so productivity and efficiency is important. And if you are an online event that you can meet 20, 30 people online in 5 minutes, speed networking, it's much more efficient if you go to a trade show and you do like 10 meetings or 5 meetings. Of course, you can discuss the deepness of the meeting online and in person. I agree with that. Again, everyone is different, so some people this works very much. So this is where I'm heading, and what I've been reading and listening is a lot of these experts that are like Dr. Marty Wade and all these guys that are in the event sphere, and that they've been dabbling around the digital events and digital world for some years now, even before COVID. So I'm trying to learn from their experiences and what they've been doing there in their own conferences to try to achieve what's best.
Thank you, Jay.
Let me go to Jameel and you follow me. Okay. I'll be fairly quick. So I think for us at Aon, we're going in some ways back to the basics, if you will. So we just finished launching a new brand that included a new purpose and proposition for us. And we spent a lot of time understanding what our colleagues wanted. So both what do they experience today and what do they want to be true in their experience of Aon in the future. And there were 3 things that emerged for us. And so for me, it's going to those over and over again. So 1, they want strategic clarity. They want inspirational leaders, and they want a clear and shared vision. And so in our work, we are using this new brand launch to really articulate what Aon is about, how colleagues are successful at Aon, how they can measure that success, how that then delivers for our clients, and what are the values, behaviors, and things that we need to have in place and true for that to come to life. And so I think as we kind of emerge from maybe the, lockdown version or quarantine version of being in a pandemic into a new world where we're choosing some of these things, like I'm choosing to be at home, or I'm choosing to be a virtual or hybrid worker. I think for us, what is next is being really clear about our bigger purpose. And back to what Jameel said, being an organization that's clear about what we're about so that people can make a choice. Do I want to be a part of this organization or not? Does this organization's values align to mine, and do I want to be a part of what they're doing? And I hope for many people the answer to that question will be yes. And then I think in terms of where we're going, it's just how do we continue to upskill and equip our colleagues and leaders to be successful in this new world. What am I reading? So it's kind of a funny question because my daughter is like a bookworm, and so I am always reading something for myself, and I'm trying to keep up with her. So I'm very proud because I just finished A Promised Land by Barack Obama. And I don't know if you've read this book, but it is the heaviest book I think I have ever read, and maybe one of the densest. And so the mind share to get through the content, it was fascinating and I loved it. And also the political world, I am just fascinated by. And so that was a big accomplishment. But I'm also reading a book called Watsons Go to Birmingham by an author called Christopher Paul Curtis that my daughter recommended because it's something that she read. So I'm always doing the my book, her book, trying to keep up with that. And then I find, somebody asked in the chat about LinkedIn and networking apps. I find articles on LinkedIn super helpful just to keep up with trends and kind of current conversations. And so for me, those are the three things. Jameel, I didn't mean to get us right out of time, but certainly share.
You're all good, and I'll go quickly. You know, obviously we're in a changing industry, and the landscape for local news and local journalism is very different today than what it was a decade ago, and even very different than what it was 5 years ago. So we're in an interesting space where we're trying to figure out what does a sustainability model look like? What does this shift to a digital first organization mean? And one of the reasons I came here is how do you now center equity within the work of journalism, and how are you ensuring that as you're thinking about holding powerful figures accountable, that you're also reflecting the voices of the community and reflecting the voices of those who have been often left out of that conversation. So that's been super important for me, and that shift has been really important. What am I reading? The Inquirer. So make sure you all read the Inquirer. The other things that I'm reading, you know, some of the classics. I stay pretty close to Adam Grant, Malcolm Gladwell, their podcasts. There's a phenomenal couple of podcasts on NPR, Throughline, and then Hidden Brain with Shankar Vedantam are fantastic. Because we're a university, Malcolm Gladwell just did a fantastic piece on the U.S. News World Rankings for colleges and universities, and how that's derived and how it is consistently left out HBCUs and other BIPOC serving institutions. So I would encourage you all to go listen to that podcast and get up on that article. It is really fascinating.
I just added that to my list. Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you all. I want to, compliment each of you for sharing so openly and so authentically with our colleagues on, this Zoom session. Thank you so much for, I learned something from each of you, and I really appreciate your thoughtful responses. Kerry, I want to turn it back over to you, and I think we can say thank you again, but please, thank you, Jay, thank you, Jameel, thank you, Kelly. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and spending this time with you. I'll turn it back over to you, Kerry.
Yeah, great job. Thank you so much to all our panelists, and Eric, great job for you as well.